I know the thumbnail was clickbait. I'm sorry about that, guys. It's not something I'm planning on doing frequently. It's not to my taste. No shade to others who do it. But I did it because a particularly interesting, read disgusting video showed up on my For You page on TikTok saying that Githyanki are Israel. And I want people to see this. I need people to see this video because it highlights why I do what I do. And what I do is talk about bigotry in the TTRPG space and adjacent spaces. But before we keep going, introductions. Hello, Editing VJ here. Due to the topic of this video, I will be talking about Israel and Palestine to an extent. And on the note of that, I want to make something very clear. If you come in my comments and you say it's not a genocide, I don't care. I'm not acknowledging you. Fuck, I'll probably block you. So don't waste your time. Don't waste your breath. Leave. Hey folks, before we get into that, let me introduce myself. My name is VJ Harris. My pronouns are he, him, they, them, and something funny. I am a full-time tabletop role-playing designer and professional GM. You might recognize my name from things such as MCDM Productions Arcadia, Flea Mortals, and An Elf and an Orc Had a Little Baby Volumes 1 through 4. Before we get going, I've got something to show you. Do you like tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons or Daggerheart? Have you tried getting a game going or looking for one and haven't been able to find one? Well, you're in luck. My name is VJ Harris. I am a professional, full-time game master and tabletop role-playing designer, and I want to run games for you. Quick disclaimer, as a member of a variety of marginalized identities, I want to make it abundantly clear that my tables are for everyone that can respect each other's intrinsic identities. No bigotry will be allowed at my tables. Now, here is a too long, don't want to watch all of that image that breaks down everything else I'm about to say here shortly. Right now, I have 4 games open on Tuesday, every other Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Regardless of your level of experience with TTRPGs, you are welcome. I love teaching new players. The Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday games are Daggerheart, and the Friday game is Dungeons & Dragons 5.5, aka 2024. All of the games are $30 per session, but the first 4 sessions are 50% off for all new players, and if you bring a friend, you get an additional session at 50% off. On Tuesdays from 5:30 CST to 8:30 CST, I run the Doom Awakens, a Colossus of the Drylands Daggerheart campaign frame. A prosperous region of gunslingers and outlaws has fallen into terror as colossal creatures awaken from beneath the earth. It's a mixture of Shadow of the Colossus, Red Dead Redemption, Deadlands, and On the Shoulders of Colossus. The themes of the game are breaking cycles, the burden of heroism, faith versus doubt, greed, and ordinary people accomplishing the extraordinary. Every other Wednesday from 5:30 CST to 8:30 CST, I run Rise and Fight, a tweaked Curse of Strahd campaign. You spent your whole lives in Barovia under the oppressive thumb of Count Strahd von Zarovich. It's time for you, the people, to take a stand. On Thursdays from 5:15 CST to 7:45 or 8:15 CST, I run Rise of the Machines, a motherboard Daggerheart campaign frame. In a world where magic takes the form of the technology left behind by a long-fallen civilization, a new threat rises as a malicious virus spreads through the machines that wander the wastes. It's a mixture of Horizon Zero Dawn and Forbidden West, Mortal Engines, Mad Max Fury Road, the Final Fantasy series, Full Metal Alchemist, and Slug Blasters. The themes of the game are artificial intelligence, identity and personhood, innovation and technology versus humanity. On Fridays from 5:30 CST to 8:30 CST, I run Phandelver and Below, the Shattered Obelisk. The area around Phandalin is under attack. Roving bands of goblins and bandits harangue travelers as something darker pulls the strings. This adventure blends classic fantasy with cosmic horror. Now, because I'm a professional TTRPG designer and have made things for Daggerheart and Dungeons & Dragons, which is an understatement at this point for me, when you play with me, you have a wide array of options from third-party supplements that not only I made, but also from other publishers, and me creating something customized just for you. So if you're interested, just check out the link in my bio to find all of these games. Hope to see you in one of them. Peace out. All right, back to the video. Now, before we dive into this, I want to make something abundantly clear. I am not an expert on what's been happening between Palestine and Israel for nearly a century. It wasn't until October 7th, 2023 that I had any real awareness of what was happening. Of course, I'd heard Israel be mentioned in media. I'd also heard Israel and Palestine be mentioned in media in reference to people fighting, see the Fosters on ABC Family, but I didn't know about the ethnic cleansing and apartheid, and now genocide. All that being said is, I do know enough about the situation, thanks to the education I put myself through after everything started, and I know a lot about Githyanki to pick apart what this person said and why it's wrong. Now, let's take a moment to watch this video in its entirety before I break it down section by section.
So the Githyanki are Israel. and I will be explaining. This specific group of aliens touched down on the material plane to illegally occupy a region after slaughtering all the monks that follow the teachings of gold D&D Jesus. They enact egregious violence to secure a weapon of mass destruction. But it's actually just an object that secures the political position of their leader. The mortal enemy that they created an entire militaristic dogma around is not even 3 blocks away, and they're selling you shit that they stole from people. These Githyanki venerate Vlaakith as a benevolent god when she is literally a fucking lich. It's hilarious. They're the only people you're allowed to nuke. So obviously they're Israel.
Okay, the first part. This specific group of aliens touched down on the material plane to illegally occupy a region after slaughtering all the monks that follow the teachings of gold D&D Jesus. So he's not incorrect about the Githyanki coming down and slaughtering the monks. The definition of slaughter from Oxford Languages says defeat an opponent thoroughly. And also there's a very clear connotation with the word slaughter. We typically use the word slaughter for people that couldn't fight back, as in they didn't have the capability, or was a major defeat like an exponentially greater force against an exponentially smaller force. That, in my opinion, perfectly aligns with what the Githyanki did to the monks of Lathander. However, that's where the factual statement ends for this particular section. The Rosamoran Monastery is a monastery to Lathander. Lathander is a Faerunian greater god with a vast portfolio including birth, renewal, spring, and youth, as well as athletics, self-perfection, vitality, and creativity. The Morning Lord was symbolized by the rising sun, but rather than being the god of the sun itself, he was the god of dawn, which represented the potential of a new day, a god of hope and beginnings. Lathander's name was invoked at the start of new endeavors, whether sealing a new deal or setting out on a new journey. There is no comparison to be made between him and Jesus. He exists alongside other gods in a polytheistic pantheon. He's not a martyr. In fact, the dude caused a cataclysm because he wanted to reshape the gods in his own image. Let's talk about the Dawn Cataclysm and what that cost the world. The Dawn Cataclysm was an attempt by the god Lathander to reshape the pantheon of deities more in his own image. It is unknown when this event occurred, but Lathander failed, resulting in the destruction of several deities, powerful outsiders, and Mythdraenor. Mythdraenor, formerly known as the city of Cormanthor, the city of song, or the city of love, among other names, was the former capital city of Cormanthir in the forest of Cormanthor. Jesus Christ. It was considered by many to be the pinnacle of shared knowledge, culture, and civilization in Faerun, as well as a beacon of serenity and solidarity in the chaotic realms. For hundreds of years after the Weeping War, Mythdraenor languished as fiend-infested ruins. After hundreds of years, the city was reclaimed by the elves of Evermeet in the late 14th century DR. It enjoyed a century-long renaissance before falling to ruin once more. While Mythdraenor was the exemplification of tolerance between the races, there were some cultural traditions that separated the Tel Quasir from non-elven citizens. For example, many elves only spoke to others of their own kind unless they were specifically addressed, the exception being moon elves and their outgoing nature. Noble-born elves were always granted right of way, even in the case of personal flight, and were never to be looked in the eyes unless they did so first. So not to say the gods or the outsiders were perfect, or even Mythdraenor was, but Lathander's actions did actually harm the world. Where's the equivalent for Jesus? Tell me. Somebody tell me in the comments, because as a former Christian, I am at a loss for words. Since the Githyanki are posed as Israel, a nation full of Jewish people, positioning the Githyanki as killing the followers of D&D Jesus, which is a really fucking weird way to describe Lathander, as mentioned above, is playing into the age-old anti-Semitic stereotype that Jewish people killed Jesus and want to kill all of his followers. Stepping away from this whole bit, I want to talk about my use of the phrase a nation full of Jewish people and the anti-Semitic stereotype about Jewish people killing Jesus and his followers. I want to make something abundantly clear. I am in no way saying that because Israel is a nation of Jewish people, you cannot critique the nearly century of ethnic cleansing and apartheid and now almost 3 years of active genocide. What I am saying is Israel is full of Jewish people. Not all Jewish people, but they are Jewish people, and you still need to be cognizant of falling into anti-Semitic stereotypes, because despite what Israel is currently doing to the Palestinians, the Lebanese, the Congolese people, one of Israel's major exports are diamonds. The uncut ones are largely sourced from Africa, including from the DRC, which fuels the violence in the region. The Jewish identity is still one of marginalization, and when you spread anti-Semitism, you're not just hurting Israeli Jewish people, which is bad, but you're hurting all Jewish people, including our allies, which it shouldn't matter if they are good Jewish people. Bigotry is wrong no matter who you do it to. Onto the deicide anti-Semitic trope. This comes from Anti-Semitism Uncovered. Myth Jews Killed Jesus by the ADL. Yes, I know the ADL has been full of shit with a lot of things lately, but that doesn't make them wrong on everything, and this article is also properly sourced. The myth that Jews collectively murdered Jesus, also referred to as deicide, has been used to justify violence against Jews for centuries. Historians as well as Christian leaders have agreed that the claim is baseless. Jesus was crucified in Jerusalem sometime around 30 CE 1, and Pontius Pilate, then serving as the Roman prefect or governor of Judea, both presided over the trial of Jesus and gave the order for his crucifixion. These events took place in a complicated social context in which religion and politics were inseparable. In the New Testament, Jesus is said to have been tried in a Jewish judicial body called the Sanhedrin, apologies for the pronunciation, before being turned over to the Roman authorities. Time and again, these circumstances have been cited as proof of Jewish deicide. One of the earliest and clearest examples appears in Matthew 27:25, written several decades after the events. When Pontius Pilate second guesses his decision to have Jesus crucified, Jews are caricatured as a bloodthirsty lynch mob. This narrative is patently false. While certain leaders in the local Jewish community felt that Jesus' teachings were politically subversive, experts have gathered that Jesus was not perceived as particularly threatening or enraging to the Jews around him. Modern readers misinterpret the trial of Jesus as a conflict between Jews and Christians, but this does not square with the Jewish origins of Christianity or with the fact that Christianity emerged years after Jesus' death. The only non-Jews present in the story of Jesus' crucifixion were the Romans. The Catholic Church under Pope Paul VI finally discredited the notion of Jewish deicide in 1965 in its Declaration of Relation of the Church to Non-Christians, published by the Second Vatican Council. In no uncertain terms, the declaration states that the crucifixion of Jesus cannot be charged against all the Jews without distinction, then alive, nor against the Jews of today. Despite this reckoning, the myth of Jewish deicide has persisted for millennia. What's more, over the centuries, it has inspired derivative myths such as accusations that Jews desecrate the Eucharist or poison wells to kill Christian villagers. Because the Quran explicitly states that Jews did not kill Jesus, a more common version of this trope in the Muslim world utilizes certain contested anecdotes from scripture involving Jewish individuals to make unfair and inaccurate generalizations that collectively accuse all Jews of being killers of divine prophets. Very few details of Jesus' crucifixion have been or even can be verified as historical fact. In October 2023, anti-Semitic GDL flyers were distributed in Macon, Georgia, reading, "Every single aspect of Christ's crucifixion is Jewish." In December 2023, an individual verbally harassed a protester holding an Israeli flag on Harvard's campus, saying, "I'll kill you, you're the American Taliban, and you killed Jesus." On October 25, 2022, Israeli anti-Zionist author Michael Peled tweeted the following: "The brilliant Mohammed Sabina. Nablus say goodbye to her fighters. In the latest raid in Nablus, Israelis killed 3 Palestinian fighters and 2 unarmed men." Sabina uses the image of Michelangelo's famous Pieta, Mary holding Jesus moments after he died. May 16, 2021, anti-Israel rally in Miami. "Jesus was Palestinian and you killed him too." Nothing wrong with an anti-Israel rally. I fully support them, but anti-Semitism can still happen at these. Mel Gibson's film The Passion of the Christ depicts Pontius Pilate as having been entirely reluctant to sentence Jesus. Only when he is blackmailed into submission by Jewish authorities does he go through with the sentencing. The title of a book sold on Amazon perpetuates the trope of deicide: "Why the Jews Killed Jesus, a Comprehensive Investigation of Judaism and the Source of Their Hatred of Christ." Spanish edition, September 2020. It was the whole crowd in front of Pilate about to riot, which made Pilate give way by their calling down upon themselves and their descendants the responsibility for the deicide death of God in his human nature. Now this crowd was overwhelmingly Jewish, and the crowd identified themselves as such, us and our children. Therefore, the blame for the deicide rests upon those descendants unless and until collectively they recognize and adore their own true Messiah. But scripture says this will only happen at the end of the world. Bishop Richard Williamson, a provocative traditionalist Catholic preacher with a history of anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial, April 13th, 2019. Catholics have lost every single battle in the culture wars because they cannot bring themselves to say the word Jew. Because they cannot say the word Jew, they cannot identify the enemy. Am I saying that the Jews are our enemy? Yes, the Jews are the people who killed Christ. They are enemies of the entire human race. E. Michael Jones, a traditionalist Catholic anti-Semitic ideologue. Next part of the video, they enact egregious violence to secure a weapon of mass destruction, but it's actually just an object that secures the political position of their leader. This statement is actually correct. Blacketh wants the astral prism because it's the only way to access the section of the astral plane that holds Orpheus. Orpheus is the first and only son of Mother Gift, the leader of the rebellion that freed the race that would bear her name from the Illithid Empire. Okay, next part, right? Nothing else to add there. The mortal enemy that they created an entire militaristic dogma around is not even 3 blocks away, and they're selling you shit that they stole from people. What the fuck are we talking about? What the fuck are you talking about? What does this mean in the context of the video? What are they selling? What is going on here? What was the point of bringing up the mind flayers? Are they being positioned as victims here or what? Now, we can get into a conversation about how genocide is bad no matter who you do it to, but there's a much more nuanced thing to discuss in the context of mind flayers, and the nuance is fucking dead in this video. Actually, it was never alive, but if anybody can explain that to me, please let me know, because I am at a loss for words. Again, I am so confused about what that point was trying to make. Okay? These Githyanki venerate Blacketh as a benevolent god when she's literally a fucking lich. Part of this is incorrect, specifically them venerating Blacketh as a benevolent god. The Githyanki see her as their undisputed absolute ruler and queen to whom they owe total obedience. As a people, they venerate military strength, cunning, self-determination, and the acquisition of wealth through interplanar raids. They think the weak need to be culled, and Blacketh instills those ideals alongside the rest of the Githyanki. In what way would you call her a benevolent god? In what way would you think they value her as a benevolent god? They don't value anything like that. It's weakness. Now, she is a lich, which brings us into more anti-Semitic territory. Regardless of who you think is being talked about as a lich, whether it's Benjamin Netanyahu or some other Israeli government official, it's anti-Semitic. Now, no one can actually reasonably argue against the statement that liches are parasites. A parasite is an organism that lives on or inside another species, the host, obtaining nutrients at the host's expense. Liches must consume souls to fuel their phylactery and prevent their bodies from decaying, which kills the host most of the time. The Jewish parasite is an anti-Semitic trope used mostly by the Third Reich. It is based on the myth that the Jews of the diaspora are incapable of forming their own states and would therefore attack and exploit states and peoples. The stereotype is often associated with the accusation of usury, the illegal or unethical act of lending money at excessively high, extortionate, or unlawful interest rates. It often targets vulnerable individuals and is used to describe predatory lending. And the separation of productive capital and financial capital, high finance. In the Nazi period, it served to legitimize the persecution of Jews up until the Holocaust. Final part, at least of the video. It's hilarious. They're the only people you're allowed to nuke, so obviously they're Israel. As far as I can remember, the Githyanki are the only people that the game explicitly gives a mechanism to blow up the entire location they're at. You can effectively nuke other locations with hacks like a bajillion barrels of wine and fire, but that's not the game explicitly giving you that. But nuking people is bad, right? It doesn't matter who they are, what they've done. Nuking people is bad, right? From a moral standpoint, right? And also from a legal standpoint, you're not allowed to nuke a fucking country under the principles of distinction. The principle of distinction requires parties to a conflict to distinguish between combatants and civilians, and military objectives and civilian objectives. This applies to all countries, including the United States, though not a party to the Additional Protocol 1 of 1977. The U.S. recognizes this principle as binding, customary international law. The U.S. military manual recognizes distinction as a foundational rule of the law of armed combat. U.S. military operations are legally required to be directed only against military objectives. It applies to both international and non-international conflicts. While accepting the principle, the U.S. has maintained distinct interpretations on some aspects, such as the definition of direct participants in hostilities by civilians. Hell, even in this fucking abhorrent administration, Caroline Levis admits it's against international law and the US would follow international law. Psych! But she still says it.
Garrett. The president posted this morning about, his threat that on leaving Iran, he said we might blowing up and completely obliterating all of their electric generating plants, oil wells, Harg Island, and possibly all desalinization plants. Under international law, striking civilian infrastructure like that is generally prohibited. Why is the president threatening what would amount to potentially a war crime with the U.S. military? And how do you square that with the administration repeatedly saying that the U.S. does not target civilians?
Look, the president has made it quite clear to the Iranian regime at this moment in time, as evidenced by the statement that you just read, that their best move is to make a deal, or else the United States Armed Forces has capabilities beyond their wildest imagination, and the president is not afraid to use them. That's not what I said, Garrett, and you're saying the word potential for a reason, because I'm sure some experts are telling you that in your ear to try to ask me that question. Of course, this administration and the United States Armed Forces will always act within the confines of the law, but with respect to achieving the full objectives of Operation Epic Fury, President Trump is going to move forward unabated, and he expects the Iranian regime to make a deal with the administration.
To that end, which of those objectives would destroying a desalinization plant most help?
Haley, go ahead.
Thanks, Caroline.
Before I move on, I want to show you some of the fucking comments and talk a little about them. Blacketh is Netanyahu and the Githzerai are Palestinians. Holy fucking shitballs. God fucking hell, one of two things is happening here. Either the person knows nothing about the history between the Githzerai and the Githyanki, or they do and they think what's happening is a war between two people rather than a fucking genocide when it comes to Israel and Palestine. But let's talk about the history of the Gith real quick so you have an actual understanding. Origins. The ancient origin of the Gith was clouded in mystery. Even the name of that original race, which some refer to as the Forerunners, was lost to time. Some sources claim that they were originally humans from a world called Faragos, located in an unknown crystal sphere that had been conquered by the Illithids during the expansion of the Empire, and who had been slowly altered by the Mind Flayers' genetic experiments. Others claim that they might have been created by the Illithids themselves through mixing humanoid hosts with powers from the Far Realm. It has been suggested that the enslavement of the Gith and the Duergar happened during the early expansion of the Mind Flayer Empire. Whether the Gith were human or some unknown humanoid race, centuries of servitude and selective breeding changed them considerably. In a practical sense, the Gith were in fact made by the Mind Flayers. Although revolts were not uncommon among the Mind Flayer slaves, for a long time they posed no challenge. However, over time, some slaves developed some resistance against their master's mind control and started secretly improving their psionic abilities. When they judged that the time was right, the Forerunners, under the guidance of their leader Gith, mentioned her before, revolted in an unprecedented uprising, causing a chain reaction that culminated in the death of countless elder brains and ushered the downfall of the Illithid Empire. In less than a year, the devastation brought the Mind Flayers to the brink of extinction and forced their surviving enclaves into hiding, a downfall from which they have never fully recovered to this point. Civil War and separation. Soon after securing their freedom, Gith ordered the continuation of the war effort. The Mind Flayers were to be hunted down to the last one, and the Gith were to establish a new empire based on conquest. At this point, Zerthamon, a Gith who had gathered a significant following during the fight for freedom, challenged Gith's leadership and her motives, arguing that she would end up leading the people into a similar tyranny that their former masters enforced. The disagreement led to a violent civil war among the Gith. Zerthamon was killed, and his followers, who called themselves Githzerai, meaning those who spurn Gith in the Gith language, retreated to Limbo in defeat, but not before dealing substantial damage to Gith's forces, which could no longer sustain a continuing campaign against the Mind Flayers. This internal struggle gave sufficient time for the surviving Mind Flayers to retreat and hide in well-defended underground locations. Gith led her surviving followers, who at this point started calling themselves Githyanki, meaning children of Gith, to the former Illithid settlements in the astral plane, where they could regroup and gather their strength in order to resume their plans of conquering the entire multiverse, as well as exterminating both the Mind Flayers and the Githzerai. Thus, the two divided races remained bitter enemies that constantly thwarted each other's plans. The Githyanki expanded their conquering efforts to include raids into Githzerai strongholds. The Githzerai were also deploying missions to root out and destroy Illithid settlements, maintained a steady effort to oppose the Githyanki militaristic expansion. This enduring conflict prevented either race from obtaining a decisive victory against the Mind Flayers and brought the conflict to a stalemate. Now that you know the history, you see why it's fucking fucked up? Obviously, one is worse than the other. If this is an example of not knowing the lore of the Gith schism, then they're just ignorant of the game lore. If it's an example of knowing the lore of the Gith schism, this is just like the people who call the genocide a war rather than what it fucking actually is. They call it a war to downplay what Israel is doing to Palestinians. Another comment. The only good Githyanki is a dead Githyanki, except Lae'zel. That's Bazel after we beat some sense into her and turn her against Blackett. This person agrees that Githyanki are Israel. They are fucking saying the only good Israeli is a dead one. You understand the problem, right? Right. I'm assuming you do. Please tell me you do. Another comment, right? Exactly why I killed all the Gith, including Lae'zel. Once again, another person sharing that they'd be fine killing all Israelis. Another comment, that's why I killed all of them. Again, another person sharing they'd be fine killing all Israelis. Another comment, this is just further justification for me to kill on sight them in BG3. A monster on two legs is still a monster. Again, another person sharing that they'd be fine killing all Israelis and dehumanizing them at that point. Let's continue. Okay, I don't feel bad for killing off Lae'zel anymore. And again, another person sharing they'd be fine killing off Israelis. They're also born evil, as shown in that one side quest where you steal a Gith egg to be raised with love and care, and he slaughters his caretakers. There is not a single actual race in D&D that is born evil. Like an actual official D&D race, right? They can be raised in a culture that venerates evil acts, but they aren't born evil, and neither is any fucking person. Also, from a lore standpoint, the raised with love and care is fucking laughable. The second you refuse to give the egg to Lady Esther, she decides to fucking attack you. I in no way believe that her or the Society of Brilliance, a small order of scholars dedicated to researching the ecosystem of the Underdark, are just gonna raise a Githyanki baby with love and care. Now, I'm sure there are some people who are watching this video that are like, "Oh, you're that's a stretch. Just because they say these things about Githyanki doesn't mean they're like talking about Israelis." But I want to pause here so that we can literally do an exercise, right? Just think this through, right? If I say, yeah, I think monkeys are just like black people, right? I think their behavior is identical, and monkeys are black people. If I say monkeys are black people, right? Let's say I say that, which for those that don't know is a racist stereotype that is applied to black people, right? So don't actually say this to anybody, but I'm using it as an example. If I say monkeys are black people, and then I say, oh man, I think all monkeys should be killed, in the context of the conversation where I just said monkeys are black people, are we not going to like agree that this is like not even really coded language? Like, it's very clear about what the person is saying here in the context of this conversation. Now, of course, it'd be one thing if I said, oh, all black people are monkeys, right? And then we left the conversation for like, I don't know, a few days or something. And then I said, man, all monkeys should die. That would be stretching it for me to then say, oh yeah, they're totally talking about black people, because maybe they're not. You know, there is some plausible deniability, but there's no plausible deniability in this situation, okay? Like, so I'm begging you, before you get in my comments and say, you're stretching it, please just think. Just pause and think, okay? All right, let's keep going. This video, which has at least 69,400K likes, 262 comments, of which the majority agree, 7.8K bookmarks, 21.5K shares, and 416,000.3K views, has reinforced the negative ideas of who knows how many people towards Israeli people, the people, using the Githyanki as a vessel. Okay, now that I've broken that down, I'm going to talk about why it's so important to myself and many others to discuss these kinds of things. I know there is this mantra of fiction doesn't affect reality, and for the most part, that's true in a very specific way. Watching a video about a serial killer is more than likely not going to make someone go become one. I say more than likely because maybe those girls who tried to summon Slenderman by attacking that other girl fall into that category, but that's not really relevant to this conversation, right? But fiction does affect reality in a different sense. Here's a definition of fiction: literature in the form of prose that describes imaginary events and people, something that is invented or untrue. Let's define propaganda. Propaganda is the systemic, deliberate spreading of information, rumor, or ideas, often biased, misleading, or one-sided, to influence public attitudes on behavior. In a lot of instances, propaganda is fiction, right? It's fiction that affects our lives. Here are two concrete examples. Birth of a Nation, a completely fictional movie that caused a significant rise in hate crimes and racial violence, directly contributing to the revival of the Ku Klux Klan. Jaws, the 1975 movie, had a significant negative impact on real-world shark populations and public perception. The film triggered a Jaws effect, fueling a fear-driven hunting frenzy that saw large shark populations, particularly great whites, drop by roughly 50 to 79% in the Atlantic, while increasing unregulated trophy shark tournaments. Fuck, I'll give you a direct example for Dungeons & Dragons itself. Now, this image that you can go and look at, or you can see on the screen, is from some forum that I can't find at this point, right? But the image is here. Learn all you need to know about race from Dungeons & Dragons. From reading and posting on the opposing views section of the forum, I read a lot of foolish comments from statements like, I know a black person who is really smart, therefore everything you're saying about racial intelligence differences is wrong. Well, of course, the lack of understanding of statistics this statement shows is staggering. I try to recall in my life when I could have fallen for such a foolish statement and can't think of when I would have. I completely understood how there could be smart blacks and yet blacks be less intelligent than whites as a whole when I was a child. When was the first time I thought about an idea like that? When I got into Dungeons & Dragons at the age of 9 or 10. I knew that elves were more agile than humans. I knew that because they had a +1 bonus back when I started playing, now it's a +2 to dexterity. I knew they were more dexterous even though the average elf had a dexterity of 11.5 and humans could have a dexterity of 18. These days, orcs have an average intelligence of 8.5, 10.5 average for 3d6 minus 2. And since IQ roughly responds to D&D intelligence times 10, then that puts your typical orc at an average IQ of 85. Who does that remind you of? Of course, even as a child, long before I was racially aware, I would have known you were a fool if you said that orcs were as smart as humans just because you had an orc character with an intelligence of 16. So when I was 10, I apparently knew more about statistics than your typical anti does. And this point may seem a bit silly, but it introduces an important idea that most white people are conditioned not to believe in: racial essentialism. The idea that race determines certain characteristics or tendencies. We knew that elves were more dexterous, that dwarves were tough, that orcs were mean and nasty. We also knew that there were exceptions, and that exceptions didn't mean general trends didn't still apply. D&D has a lot about racial loyalty. Elves band together in protection of their forests, orcs raid human villages and have to be stopped by the hero. In D&D, you have loyalty to your people, and you know that sometimes race in general can be a threat to yours. As I've grown older over the years, I've continued to enjoy role-playing games, and though the games I've played have advanced beyond just fighting orcs and find magic items, but I think that some of those ideas I was exposed to as a child were good lessons that maybe helped me come to terms with ideas that are part of being a white nationalist. As you can see, this person was like, yeah, D&D really solidified my beliefs on how you can have one black person be more intelligent than some white people, but still have white people be more intelligent than black people in general. Now, of course, I am in no way saying this person wouldn't have believed this if they hadn't played D&D in the first place. That is probably not the case, right? They would have gotten here in some way. What I am saying is we don't need to create media that solidifies the beliefs of Nazis, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and white nationalists. I know I'm using a lot of synonyms and whatnot. What I'm also saying is we can't just ignore when people like Shut Up Art say ridiculous shit like this, given the realities of the world we fucking live in. But that's all for now, folks. See you in the next one. Peace out.